Charles. Here you are now at gas station, Charles. So next time I need some gas, I'll just come to you. Good to go. Everyone will be happy.
Actually, Charles is a saint. Let me tell you this. Charles is a saint, and his wife is a double saint for putting up with him. Uh, um, he is on holiday, so he is volunteering time during his holiday, very crazy early in the morning, um, to be here with us and to keep the schedule going. Let's put it this way, because usually um, during holidays there is a crazy period in which it's really hard to get everyone on the same schedule as in the rest of the year. So um, I am in awe both of him and his wife, because he's with family and with his wife. So yeah, she's a double saint. Let us put out this, and I hope he Charles, you are appreciative, as you should, of her. All right, finance. I have this question for you. Because today I actually had my coffee in the morning um, with Daryl here, and I'm kind of talkative today, so you all will have to bear with me um, a little. Um, my question is about Sweden, because I already talked about them, and because I know yesterday we had a guest. I don't know if you yesterday for me. I guess it's still today for you. It was early for you. We had an impromptu guest um, from Sweden, if I am not um mistaken. We were talking about CV90s, and my question is the following: money related. So we are talking money. We are talking numbers. When you have a budget for a country, and you start, you're at the beginning of the year, you lay out, well, I foresee, right? It's always on um, foreseeable future. I foresee with my not with a crystal ball, but with numbers and predictions from past years. Um, how much money I'm gonna get this year from social insurance, from I don't know, this and that, and taxes and so on. And then as a state, I start budgeting, right? This amount for um, defense, this amount for education, this amount for administration, this amount for, I don't know, each and every category, because each country has a different structure of the budget, right? Some of them are similar, and some of them are more granular. Like there are countries which have, for example, 23 or 27 ministers, and there are ministries, and there are countries which have 15 or 8 it depends on the
Well,
country.
Ghana, just 1,200 ministries in Ghana. This is one of the problems they're having with government finances. Things I learned talking to our friend Ali. If you want to go in the Finance Hall of Shame, it's my personal Hall of Shame for bad government running. Have 1,200 ministers in your government. Thank you, Ghana, for showing us all how not to do it. Please do better, people. Anyway, sorry, back to you. There's the record number. I believe that's the world record right now.
I actually didn't know that, and it's kind of funny. And let me tell you, you're right. You're probably right. The I think that there is a link, right? The number of ministers that you have is in opposite. Um, how do you say, ratio? In opposite ratio to how efficient you are actually handling your money. So my question was regarding, for example, NATO. There is a provision that every country in NATO should spend for their from their budget, should spend 2.5% on military, on defense, right? On defense assets, I suppose, but probably not only. My question is, if you are I don't know how to ask this. How do you balance this with the rest of your budget? And how and where those extra money come from? And I'm asking this because I want to understand why some countries, like Estonia, managed to find money to send to Ukraine, like in equal numbers. If I am correct, they sent approximately the same amount they used for their defense. They send the same amount to Ukraine, and other countries are let's say not able to find money or something else. So this is, I don't know if you get my point. How do you budget? Do you have a reserve? How does it work? Do they take from the budget of defense? Do they take from other sections of the budget? We are at the end of 2022. We are 3 days left in 2022, and we get to 2023. And usually some of the budgets are already signed, and we should know by now how much money can a country send to Ukraine in the next year. And this is how I got to my question. How do you or where do you find this extra money? How can we be more efficient in sending money to Ukraine? Not only money, but assets. Do I make sense?
Sure. So why is it Estonia is able to send a metric ton as a percentage of their GDP to Ukraine, and we're not seeing the same thing out of other countries? Is that the question in short?
Yes.
Great. This is a question of political will, right? It's not a question of ability. It's a question of desire, and it's a question of will of leadership, right? Estonia sits right next to Russia. They have been genocided in the past. They view Russia as an existential threat, and they think, and that is the primary way in which the Estonians worry that they might be genocided yet again. They also know that if left to their own devices, Russia would roll them over and reintegrate them back into the Russian Empire in the most horrific way possible, and they aren't down for that, right? Estonians like being independent. The problem that they have when it comes to dealing with Russia is, at the end of the day, Estonia is a country of 1.7 million people. Not, there's like less than 1.7 million ethnic Estonians in the world, and if they want to be independent, they do need allies and help. So they can't just do this all on their own. They are a very small nation. That said, they value human rights, they value freedom, and they value fighting Russia. So for the Estonians, spending on their military, so they can't just be rolled by Russia if they were to attempt something, and that they could, and being part of NATO is an existential question for them, right? It is, we have this or we don't have a nation. So to them, their calculus, their thoughts around dealing with Russia are just fundamentally different from, say, Germany or France, who do not feel the same way and don't have the will, societally speaking, to support Ukraine because they do not see the problem front and center. And they do not have the same world outlook and perspective on Russia that the Estonians have. So I would say that the problem is not really one of ability to pay, like all these nations being discussed have the ability to give significantly more to Ukraine. It's a question of political will, right? Even early on in the space, you'll often hear arguments around, why would we pay for Ukraine when we have X, Y, and Z problem in our country. You hear this often from Americans, right? And this goes both directions, right? You see the farther left talking about it. Why are we spending money on Ukraine when we have, take your pick of homelessness, no public health care, whatever social problem you want to see from that perspective in America. Or we hear from the right wing of why would we pay for Ukraine when we don't have take your pick of lower tax rates or secure borders. Either way, my response is, look, whatever issue we have here in America, we could have dealt with this one way or the other 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago. We have these issues that we aren't paying for as a society, and we have as a society an ability to pay for these things. So there's not a trade-off here. It's not we're going to spend for Ukraine or we're not going to have these things, right? If we wanted to have a public health system, we would have politically sorted that out to cover the political hot button topic. But quite frankly, at the end of the day, that is a normal political question that we here in America are still debating or discussing and currently have an answer to. Whether you like that answer or not, there is a societal answer to that. As countries, we could all be spending more to assist Ukraine. The Estonian level of GDP per capita that they're giving to Ukraine is not making them a broke country, right? Estonia is not going to go and have Weimar level inflation because they're sending so much stuff to Ukraine. That's not going to happen. They understand fighting Russian hegemony. They understand fighting Russian genocide. They dealt with it themselves, and they want to help the other people dealing with such terrible things. All for that, right? I think the Estonians get it right here, and a lot of the rest of the world is not getting it right. But it's a question of will. It's not a question of affordability. And by the way, small correction. It's not 2% of budget because different countries have hugely different budgets and tax and everything else differently. It's 2% of gross domestic product, which is a much higher number. Right? Your government's budget is never 100% of your GDP. So it's 2% of how much stuff is produced in your nation sort of needs to go to national defense. That's the idea behind NATO, that everyone needs to pay something for their military. And that's not a tiny number, but it's also not a huge number. There's definitely nations that pay significantly more than that. The small nation, you'd have Israel would be one example. For a huge nation that's not currently involved in this war we're discussing, China spends significantly more than that as well. So it is totally feasible. And I just named two countries on different extremes of human rights. I know one of those hot button, like one is literally actively committing genocide in China and has horrific aims for its military spending. The other is just trying, to survive in a more hostile neighborhood. Maybe you disagree with me completely in Israel, whatever. I don't want to get into that debate. But the point is, you see really varied countries with very different governmental forms and choices around social spending and choices around how you divvy up capital in your economy, still able to spend significant amounts on their military. So more military spending and or more aid to Ukraine are both societal choices that all wealthy modern nations, or even middle income modern nations, can make. And it's around how you want to run your society and what sort of leadership you have.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but um, this is how I see it. Blame it on me being a woman. So um, if I'm wrong, blame it on that. I see the budget of a country as the budget of a house, right? There are some people who are constantly minding and investing in let's put it this way. There are some people who are working like a turtle, right? They are not going in. Now, are we going to invest everything this year? We spend all our money on a car and we eat crap all year. And the next year we will buy a big house and we eat crap as well. And the next year we do this or that. And there are people who, so this is like a rabbit, right? In leaps, doing, focusing on one thing, but dismissing all the other. And there are some countries and families which take it more in a steadier way, and mind all the necessities of the family. Maybe you don't get to have the house in 1 year or the car in 1 year, but you don't get to eat, I don't know, bread with mustard for a year because you don't have money for anything else. So I think some of the countries are choosing between these two options. Most of the countries are choosing between these two options. So they are focusing on some aspects. Russia is one of them, right? They focused on 3 or 4 areas of their country: military, extraction, some production, but very narrow avenues of production. Aerospatial, and I don't know, crops. What else? They haven't developed their country in a wholesome, comprehensive way, in a way that will. I think the word I'm looking for is sustainability, right? You want sustainability. You want all the pillars of your house to be equally stable, so that if you at some point have a problem, your house is not collapsing. And I believe most, not every, but most of the Western countries have a more balanced approach. Even if, for example, we discussed this, you have some underspending in Germany, for example, in defense issues, but still the budget is really big. This is one. Still, they did have a lot of equipment in stock, and as opposed to Russia, the equipment that Germany had was actually maintained in good condition. So when it was needed to send something to Ukraine, those equipments actually worked. Um, they were not, let's say, from 10 tanks. Well, Germany didn't send tanks, but this was one of the things that amazed me in Russia, the level at which they disregarded what they had, and they didn't take care of what they had. Do I don't know if you agree with me, that there is this difference, and do I make sense?
Well, I would say that you went pretty far into a lot of different topics. So let's I'll take a couple on. I'll go from there. One, yes, every society makes their own different political choices, even if they're clearly not the choices that a majority of people want, or is it even in everyone's best interests. Russia would be a perfect example of this. Right, it is a country whose economics are run by for and of the oligarch, at the expense of the fact that this massive war is started with a huge, massive military buildup in a country where millions of people don't even have access to running water and electrified houses, right? Like they haven't had made sure that all their people have reached the 1900s for economic living, let alone the 2000s. So, yeah, clearly different countries make different choices. That said, I do not like, in general, viewing macroeconomics like microeconomics. So, microeconomics, that's the economics of companies and the economics of people. They're intuitive. Macroeconomics, that is the economics of countries and country relations and trade, are counterintuitive. And the reason they're counterintuitive is that in macroeconomics, in microeconomics, in your household, you saving more tends to always be a good thing. In macroeconomics, your spending is my income and my spending is your income. So if everyone saves more, then we wind up in a recession from something called the paradox of thrift. So I tend not to like these my viewing countries as families. Though I do like the fact that you didn't go that direction. You point out that everyone makes their own choices. Absolutely. And I think that we can ascribe some morality here. But I think that the way macroeconomics works is, just because you're doing what sounds sensible from an individual perspective can often be the height of folly from a country perspective. There's one to warn there because I just don't like those analogies when we want to start discussing how countries work. Anyways, I'll kick it back to you. If you have a more narrow question you want to ask in all of this, happy to answer it. My only request is we, you try and narrow the question down so I know which part to bite onto. There was just so much surface area there. I may have missed what you really wanted to ask.
I will let Nick go because he's been patient with his hand up, and then I will kind of narrow it down and ask a direct question, which sometimes I'm not doing, and yeah, sorry about that. Nick.
Thanks. Thanks on finance. I think I don't know if I'm going to get this right because despite what you just explained, I still don't. I'm just a layman. I don't really get the difference between micro and macroeconomics. So forgive me if this is a really stupid question, but I think what I want to, I don't know what if I want to echo on this question or just riff off it, but my impression is that the Russian system was corrupt in the Tsarist years, um, uh, incorrectly addressed by the dastardly Soviet regimes, and made worse because they didn't understand anything about human nature, and so it became even more corrupt. And then in the early 1990s, when the country had a chance to address it all, they just doubled down because they didn't address the secret police state, and hence the corruption has been amplified tenfold, and that has led to a ineffectual military, and a ridiculously corrupt economic system. And am I wrong in that sort of layman's analysis, or is that at least somewhat correct? Thank you.
All right. So we're going for a little historical economics here. Love it. Love historical economics. Yes, the Tsar system was broadly corrupt. Many monarchies are. Historically, monarchies tend to be corrupt. That said, comparing to other systems of 150-ish years ago is not exactly apples to apples to compare that to today. I completely agree with you that the current system is highly corrupt in Russia, and if you want to call it Tsarist Russia, I'm here for that approach. But that said, I don't think you suggested, the one place where I'm going to disagree here is you said they didn't deal with the problem of the police state. The Siloviki are the state. This is the state by foreign of the Siloviki. Yeltsin was of this fashion. The Soviets were run essentially by the KGB, and the military since, basically Tsarist times before has been lower on the hierarchical totem pole than you perhaps would expect from such an authoritarian country, because the military isn't the one in control. It is the state security service that's in control. They were in control in Soviet times. Before that, it was the monarch, but they were in control in the Soviet times. They're in control now, and they have been broadly pushing down keeping the military, especially military leadership, from being able to coup or take massive amounts of power. Hence why you saw Stalin purging all his generals, before World War II, which caused them significant problems. After every military conflict, in modern times, you see a massive number of premature deaths of Russian military leaders after Chechnya 1, after Chechnya 2, after Georgia, after 2014 even. Almost all of the warlords that went into the Russian warlords that went into Donbass and Luhansk in 2014, they're all dead. And they're not dead by Ukrainian hands. They were all dead before this started, right? Like the Russian security services sorted them all out. The only one of those guys that's left alive turned out to be a former Ukrainian secret police guy who, dated back to the Soviet era. Those two were quite close. The Ukrainian secret, the Ukrainian secret services, intelligence services, and the Russian intelligence services had an unfortunate level of closeness that caused problems from 2014 to now, and it's been sorted out by the Ukrainians because it's an existential risk, right? They either sort it out or they don't keep going. So I would say that, to what seems to be a problem to you, like this is corruption as a state, right? This is their state model, right? The Russian system is deeply corrupt and run by, the KGB or the FSB or whatever the hell they call themselves today. But that's by design, right? They don't view that as a problem. They view that as the point. It's not a bug. It's the entire feature.
Thank you for that, Finance. That was informative and terrifyingly hilarious at the same time. I don't know how to. I can't wrap my head around it. I mean, I sense that from how our English that we're both Americans, and it's just like WTAF.
Yeah, this ain't America. Like, I'm obviously an American. I'm from the middle of America, right? I was born in the middle of America. Like, I've an American outlook on the world, right? But when you're looking at Russia, they are not American, right? If there's anything you learn really studying Russia and Russian people is, these are not people into human rights, right? The way we are, these are people who are into authoritarianism that support, the Russian worldview supports the czar or the Putin or whatever the dictator is of the day. That is the Russian way, for lack of a better term. And people who are really into broad-based human rights have been sorted out of the system. Right? You can't advance into the senior levels of the Russian bureaucracy, being for individual agency and entrepreneurialism, be it political or whatever else, right? You don't advance in the Russian system, and if you're really into human rights activism, you're either going to spend some time in the Gulag or whatever they call it these days, or you're going to leave Russia, right? And that assumes you're not going to find a Russian window to randomly fall out of. And as much as that's like a horrific rundown, right? Like that's the way that country is. They are not there for the human rights and benefit of everyone. This is an authoritarian hellhole, right? You got to look at it for what it is. This is not a place with American or you don't have to be American to have individualistic values and think that people deserve human rights. Ukrainians are a pretty good example of people into that, right? Estonians, having been there, the last year, lived there for a couple months. That's a value they have too. This is something that we here in the Western world value. I mean, the Japanese have a very collectivist value system and a more communal based value system, but they're into human rights from the Japanese perspective. They're more authoritarian in some ways than we are culturally here in America. But that was actually my thesis on Japanese post-war Japanese economics. Like, this isn't the Japanese way of things, right? What goes on in Russia and how they treat even their own citizens. Skip the aggressive wars and how they treat other citizens, right? That wouldn't fly for a lot of other countries, right? But the idea that like the czar does what he wants and that's a good thing is the way that's sort of viewed the world there. This is the country by, for, and of the Siloviki. This is not a democratic, free nation that is there for the benefit of its people and improving the lives of all. That ain't what they're about over there.
Nick, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Anda. Thank you, Finance. It's just it kind of blows my mind that virtually every other post-Soviet state, be they a satellite vassal like Poland or Czechia or Slovakia or etc., or the Baltic states, and even the former USSR constituents like Ukraine and Kazakhstan have turned the corner on all of that, and Russia is utterly wed to it. It's just mind-boggling, and you know, I I've been I've been since a year ago trying to figure out how why aren't the good Russians coming to overthrow the Putin regime? And I've understood a lot about terror and the secret police state and all of that, but it's just mind-boggling how contented, evidently or apparently, the Russian people are with their kleptocracy. It's it's incomprehensible to me, and I'm looking forward to postmortems on this one when that rancid edifice is finally cast down and replaced by something hopefully better.
I mean, I'll leave you with this, right? There's a regular discussion and a quote that I agree with heavily, which is that it's not that this is Putin's Russia, but that this is Russia's Putin. That if it wasn't him, it would be another guy, maybe one of the guys we know, Medvedev, Patrushev, maybe someone we don't, who would himself go for similar-ish choices. Maybe not the war in Ukraine, but similarly horrific, centralized, anti-humanitarian, expansionistic choices. Because this isn't, so like I don't view this as Putin's Russia. This is Russia's Putin, right? He is their man as much as they're his country, right? Like this is Russia has the government that it wants, right? A majority of the Russian people are down for whatever the government says it wants to do, and support that they have a government that is run by a dictator, right? When he invaded Ukraine, his popularity skyrocketed, as it did when he invaded Georgia, as it did with Chechnya round two, which really vaunted and cemented Putin's power in the first place. So, this sort of thing is what is popular and what cements your, regime legitimacy in Russia, more so than any economic or, human development you can bring to your people. This is what they like. Right? Like this is what the nation yearns for in Russia, which is an absolutely frightening and disgusting fact, and also why you see all of the post-Soviet satellite states be absolutely not about that, and often be about national defense because they don't want to be genocided again. Like that's not fun living under somebody else's colonial oppression.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Anda. I just wanted to close out my participation by saying, I think this concept of Ruski Mir is not just obsolete, but toxically obsolete. It's killing hundreds of thousands of people in that part of the world because the adherents of it cannot accept that the world has changed since 100 or 150 years ago. It's a horrible myth that persists in the minds of people who really ought to just get over it. Thank you. I'm sorry for ranting, but thank you, Finance. Thank you, Anda. Thank you for letting me speak. I'll shut up.
Always welcome. I wanted to say under Russia's boot. This is how we see them, at least in Romania. Like they have big boots trying to step on everybody else. Before I go on and ask my question, to finance, trying to narrow down my earlier point, I would like to welcome Herman up.
Hi, Anna, and yeah, hi, Giles, and Finance, Nick, Whiskey, if you're still up. Yeah, thanks, Giles, for co-hosting all the time and for sticking up here on the panel. Good morning, Anna.
Good evening. I know
Good evening.
I know it's really.
When you said the big boots before that the Russians are having, I mean, big boots to trample on other people, that's what the Germans are actually usually famous for. But yeah, I can see that in Romania it's probably a little bit different and they have more contact with the Russian boot stamping down on you.
Exactly. I think it's the same expression, but it difference. The difference is who is trying to step over you.
Yeah, exactly. And the Russians are pretty good at stomping at people around them. And yeah, but what Nick said, they didn't realize that the world is changing around you. That's actually funny because from what I heard from Russians the last 10, 20 years was they didn't believe that the world was changing. It was the same it was back in the 70s and the 80s. It just more technology around, but the world was always like that and does not change. And the role of Russia in the world has not changed. So that is still ingrained in many, many of those people, even those that live as expats here in the West.
100%. And I had a previous very convoluted question for finance, and I will try to narrow it down a bit. So, and I will use the fact that finance said he had his thesis on Japan. So, seeing, I think yesterday or today, I have seen a piece of news about Japan wanting to increase their defense budget as a response to China increasing theirs. So my question would be, in this case, for finance, do you think Japan is looking at Ukraine, looking at what Russia did to Ukraine, and more or less fearing fearing the fact that in the future, in the next few years, they could be next. Like China is already a threat to Taiwan, and after Taiwan, the next set of islands after Taiwan in the Pacific is Japan, right? So, do you think they're ramping up their defense budget and changing their strategy, basically, because they are changing their strategy after Second World War, where they were focused solely on economy and not on self-defense, let's say. Would you say this is plausible? This is the reason for which they are deciding to strengthen their defense for the next year? This is one question. I have another.
Japan, different contexts, right? Japan has obviously an independent history, almost entirely in their history. Unlike, say, Ukraine, who has been owned and subjugated significantly over the years by different, foreign powers. So, and there are different world contexts, right? Japan has been the aggressor in multiple wars. Obviously, you had the Japanese Empire as the first non-European power to majorly industrialize and build a modern army. That was actually the Russo-Japanese War that was often credited for bringing down Tsarist Russia. Not that it collapsed right afterwards, but that once the Tsarist Russia had to come to a peace treaty with Japan after telling all their people it was just the easy, simple Japanese that would be run over with some incredibly racist imagery. In the day, the fact that the Japanese army showed up to the battlefield and kicked some booty, that these things occurred, that the Russo that's the way Japan did things, very different context. So the fact that they're arming now, clearly there's concerns about China over there. There's also concerns about North Korea as a bad actor in the area. Japan also has its own post-World War II legacy, where they stripped down their military. They've been a highly militarized society pre-World War II, especially from the Meiji Restoration onwards. One of the mottos of the Meiji government, if you will, was Bunarkaika. Was basically rich nation, strong army. I totally forgot how you said it in Japanese. I think I said the wrong term. Anyways, so that was sort of one of their modernizing principles of empire. So they are rearming. I would say that there is some utility, that it's probably a good thing that they're able to help out more. But there's obviously a ton of concerns locally in ways with the Japanese that there aren't. Say, if the Ukrainians got armed to the teeth, right? Nobody's worried about the Ukrainians going and taking stuff over. Outside of the Russians worried about the Ukrainians liberating their own territory, to which I say, cope harder and smoke some Atacams. But obviously the Japanese history is very different here. So the context is very different. The region is very different. But yes, they are looking to up their military budget. For a long time, they officially didn't have a military. So, that was a legacy of post-World War II. So, that's the way I think of it. Yes, I would say that obviously it's China-based. I don't think it's directly related to Ukraine. I think it's a whole lot more to do with the fears around Chinese militarism in Taiwan, more than anything else. I think it's more directly looked at there in the case of Japan.
Yeah, I wanted to add a little bit of color here to this question. So from the Chinese perspective, they are interested in Taiwan because that they regard that as their own territory, and that goes back to the Chinese empire, if you call it, although they didn't really have a lot of imperial ambitions the last couple hundred years. It's that they understood themselves more like an ethno-nation empire within the boundaries that have been added to that over the time. And so the Taiwanese government, that is the government that was swept away by the communists, and that had to flee and retreated to that island and hold on to that day. So this is like the nutshell, very, very simplified version. And the Chinese Communist Party, they did a sworn in their self-reflection that this island is not part of their own rule, because that is a reminder that they didn't succeed to unify the entire Chinese people under the communist banner, and that they would very much really like to have them back. They had for 50 years not the opportunity to do so, because they didn't have the military capabilities to reach out to the island, which is now changing in the last 10-15 years. They're coming now in a position where they can make legitimate threats to project power towards the island and actually take it. And yeah, that's going on. I mean, we all know about it in the news. So what you brought up is the next island chain outside there in Japan. So Japan and Korea, they've never been part of the Chinese Empire. However, they have been tributaries to the empire of China. So they had to pay. I'm not exactly sure that in Korea maybe there was short periods where they have been annexed or occupied by China, but Japan certainly never was. I mean, those are all culturally connected countries, like the Slavic countries. They are connected by culture and language and custom to each other, and also the Japanese, they have certain fractions of the Chinese alphabet they're using, or the writing, the written language that they're still using. And the Koreans have a very similar writing system, which stems to similar roots. But again, those have been tributary countries to the emperor. They have not been considered being part of the empire. And that's why I would guess that the Chinese do not really have the ambitions to go out for taking Japan per se. They're probably interested in a couple of islands around Taiwan, some strategic footholds for the Navy, for the Air Force, but the four main islands, they should be probably safe from the ambitions from the Chinese, just because the Chinese don't really know what to do with that. That doesn't fall into their geostrategic concept or their self-understanding of what China is. More likely would be Korea, but that is also extremely unlikely, because they're quite happy with North Korea being a boundary state to the South Korean Western nation next to them, and they do not want to take over North Korea for various reasons. It's a really great buffer. On the other hand, they do not know how to deal with the situation themselves. What is more likely, actually, is that they would try to get into negotiations or other means with Russia to get their Manchurian and Yakutian claims back, like those parts of Siberia north of China that are currently Russian. They have been taken away from the Chinese territory and given over to Russia, although the appetite there is also pretty slim. And the reason is that China is economically controlling those areas pretty much themselves already. By all the border trade, they can supply all the goods there. They own the markets, they control the consumer goods that go in there. They control a huge part of the export that goes over the border, because they're buying that stuff. And China is more likely to be playing according to the economic pathway of an empire. They're more interested in having in their interest manifested by their economic interest. And as long as the locals are playing along with that, there's no need for them to act militarily. They don't need to have a Politburo office in each of those territories, on each of those islands, and shouting out their own propagandas and forcing people under Chinese rules. They prefer actually not to govern people if they don't have to, as long as they can control the lifestyle and extract the money from those areas. So that's just my take on that.
Thank you. And I actually enjoy how the discussion went, because it takes me where I want in the end. How does this situation. So where China is right now, looking at Japan, Japan looking at China, North Korea, South Korea, which is actually a very strong economy and very forward economy. How are all these impacting? How do you see this going forward and impacting Ukraine? Because and I'm asking that because I see a polarization in the region. And I was wondering how all this preparings, all this, how do you say? When you set up your defenses or your attacks, you prepare for something, for an upcoming event will influence the support some of them give to Ukraine and the others, like China, gives to Russia, because at this point China, in my mind, sees Japan increasing their defense, sees Korea, South Korea, sending help to Ukraine. They have their own ambitions. They don't have many scruples. How do we see this going forward? Is there help or support, sort of a support they gave up until now to Putin, gonna increase or gonna decrease? Are they going to continue to buy oil because it's cheap? Are they going to send some weapons or something to Russia, or are they going to focus themselves on what's happening there in the region, and how can they prepare to attack? Basically, this is what they are preparing for, right?
So, Anna, you asked a very multi-layered question here. I'm trying to break it down a little bit by certain facets that I can get my hand on, that I understand. So the simple answer is China is trying to stick to its own realm as much as possible. They have all the hands full with their interest in Taiwan. They have a lot of different interests that are falling in here, and most of them are actually economical. They do not want to mess up too much with the West, because that will cut way too much in their already precarious trade situation with the West. There's still some sanctions going on. Finance, correct me if I'm wrong, from the Trump era, that in between, not sanctions, like the tolls.
Biden has increased them. So Trump actually, want to give him some credit on this one. Started, though it was very targeted. It wasn't always the most comprehensive policy, but he absolutely started moving towards a more aggressive trade policy against China, and that has only been increased under the Biden regime, especially with the notable anti semiconductor policy, whereby anyone that's a tech company can't export semiconductors to China, and being on board of a Chinese company is now a problem. So no, there's actually heavier sanctions now than pretty much ever that I can remember on Chinese countries in America.
Yeah, thank you, Finance. So there you have it. So
at least in the last 20 years, right? Like if you go back to like the the 80s and before, then there was obviously, but like in the last 20 years, it's definitely ratcheted up that we are currently at the heaviest point to give a historical context.
Yeah, considering that they're a major producer and we're a major consumer of those goods, that is actually an astonishing amount of trade sanctions that are in place. I think we all agree on that. So yeah, China is quite interested in it's a restricted by their foreign policy based on that. They do not want to give up their quite lucrative trade with the West. On the other hand, and they are quite willingly, for a number of reasons, to provide ideological and narrative support for Russia. In terms of, yeah, well, we get cheap oil and gas from them. We have interest in getting other things from them too. There's the military collaboration that's going on. And yeah, they do not want to mess up with too many other people. There's one core thing you need to understand. The Chinese would like to pursue their own plans and their own interests. That is foremost, of course, Taiwan. Then expansion to bases around their own territory, naval bases, those islands they have been building out as aircraft bases in the Indian Ocean, preferably also in the Pacific, to protect their own trade routes, to solidify their own power in their own realms. That is their current ongoing strategic plan. However, China considers Taiwan as an internal affair, as an inside China affair. They're getting really furious when everybody else is speaking out on behalf of Taiwan as an independent nation. With their own agency, with their own destiny, with their own choice, because that's completely violating the understanding of China of themselves. They consider Taiwan to be completely internal. And if you look at Ukraine, China does not consider Ukraine conflict to be an internal Russian conflict. China recognizes the sovereignty of Ukraine. They never acknowledged the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and they also are not that strongly in the narrative support of the war in Ukraine. If you look at the language they're putting out, they clearly do not understand that as an internal Russian conflict. So that one you need to keep in mind, because that is what's structuring the Chinese self-understanding and the foreign policy. They're always the ones to say it's an internal conflict. We cannot intervene in other countries' internal affairs. And it's especially on the level of the United Nations, where they're also vetoing power. Whenever it comes to the point that China considers something an internal conflict, they would veto any external intervention into that one. Yeah, I think that was a long enough answer. I don't want to go to the rest of the onion shell. They're here for the question. And I think, and if you're okay, we should go to Nick now.
Let's go to Nick.
Thank you. Yeah, that bit about China was fascinating, including the distinction between China's assumption that their Taiwan issue is internal, but Ukraine's is external to Russia, which is kind of borne out by international agreements. I mean, the United States recognized Ukraine as an independent sovereign country in 1991, I believe, or 1992. So that makes sense.
China.
I'm sorry?
So did China.
And yes, and so did China. So that kind of that effectively tosses cold water on the people in the media who keep saying that China is viewing the Ukraine-Russia situation as a template for their own designs on Taiwan. But before I dropped down, I wanted to ask finance because I thought he was so eloquent earlier. Is it fair for me to paraphrase your or to distill down your analysis earlier about 20 minutes ago as that the current Russian Federation kleptocracy is a government of the Siloviki for the Siloviki and or excuse me by the
By
Siloviki
foreign
of
of the
the
Siloviki,
Siloviki. And,
baby. You got it. You are
yeah,
100%
okay, good.
up what I'm putting down.
I love that. I'm gonna try and figure out a way to put that into a meme, even though I suck at memes. But thank you very much.
Well, if only there was a ton of NAFO fellas that were listening right now. Our good friend Nick would like a nice meme on the fact that Russia is the country by, for, and of the Siloviki. So if you find yourself in the audience and you happen to be a NAFO fella and you like to make memes, there's got to be someone in there. You can either PM Nick or just tweet fun memes at Nick about Russia being a horrific hellhole by, for, and of the Siloviki. And, you never know when all the funny doggo people will come up with something great for you.
1,000,000,000%. Nick would love your memes. I will spread them widely. I steal them and spread them as widely as I can already. And I'm dying for more. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Nick. And yeah, have a good night if you're popping down for space. I'm assuming you go to bed. Let's go. Did we finish the China conversation? Okay, you brought one thing up, that China is considering the Ukraine situation as a template for Taiwan. They most certainly do not. However, what they do is they are looking very closely on the West's reaction to that conflict, and not just how the military aid and the financial aid is going on, but the support structure is in the West that can be mustered against such an invasion, but also how the West displays itself, how they construct a narrative, how they think about that, and how they confront the aggressor with that, because that is believe it or not, very important for the Chinese, how their own, let's say, self-righteous course, we are just unifying the motherland, how that one would be received by the international community. And China has a quite astute need of being put in the correct light and not being disrespected, I would say, and that is something that wouldn't necessarily change their opinion or their timing on a move against Taiwan. However, that is informing them on a political level. China is a very political dictatorship, so that is one thing to control the narrative in your own country, which they are undoubtedly the grand masters of. The Chinese population is fulfilling the wishes and the orders of the Chinese government, of the Communist Party, before they're even being given. They understand how they react. They have been conditioned for many, many generations, let's say 3 or something, after the Cultural Revolution, how that has to be done. And they are very aware of what the picture looks like. So that is something that China is trying to digest from the Ukraine conflict. I would say the support that China is giving to Russia is not small. They're one of their biggest supporters in terms of power, that they're having economic power and military power. But if you look a little bit closer in finance, you can probably expand a little bit there. Like the economical and military support that they're actually giving them is not that great. Of course, they're buying cheap stuff. Whenever the Russians have to sell, they're gonna buy for pennies on the dollars. Yeah, they're happy to do that. The loan in ammunitions, perhaps if the Russians are paying, why not? But new high tech, new vehicles, new artillery, tanks, missiles. No, they come from Iran. The missiles come from Iran. How is such a country like Iran being a bigger provider of terror weapons to Russia than China is. So what kind of ally is China here right now? And I want to try to emphasize my point from before, that China is more the ideological mouthpiece type of provider, because it does not want to be seen as
Herman,
part of the
just
gang.
Herman, just a second. For our elves back home, we have some connection issues. If someone could hear us and help us, if we crash, I hope we don't. For the people in the room, if we crash, please be mindful and come back up. We will restart very soon if something happens with the space, but let's hope it doesn't. And I'm sorry, Herman, for interrupting you. Please continue.
Yeah, I think I ranted enough. Maybe Finance, do you want to give a little bit context on those economical aids that came from China to Russia, or if you know about military exchanges? I don't think they have been actually that great, have they been?
So, right